All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the absolute weirdest geographical mysteries of the 16th century. We're talking about a place that, honestly, by all accounts, should have been the absolute crown jewel of early global exploration. But instead, it ended up becoming the single most feared spot on the entire planet. Picture this. You've got this incredibly lush, resource-rich island, and it is sitting right smack in the middle of the major trade routes of the warm Gulf Stream. When a Spanish captain named Juan de Bermuda accidentally bumped into it back in 1505, he literally found an absolute paradise. I mean, we're talking abundant fresh water, a gorgeous climate, and these dense, beautiful forests. If you were a weary sailor coming back from the New World, this was exactly what you wanted to see.
But here's the twist, and it's a massive one. Despite how insanely beautiful it was, and despite having the perfect location, the greatest empires in the world were absolutely terrified of the place. They didn't see an idyllic paradise at all. No, they looked at this island and called it Iar de Demonios, the Isle of Devils.
So you've got to ask yourself, how does an island that was discovered so early on by Europeans get completely, and I mean completely shunned for over a century? Well, 16th century Spanish sailors genuinely believed the island was Demonorium Insulum. They thought it was literally haunted by demons. So whenever they were navigating the Gulf Stream trying to get home, they would go way out of their way to steer clear, basically leaving it as this untouched, terrifying void on the very edge of the known world.
Honestly, the reason they skipped it all comes down to the cold, hard, and pretty ruthless economic reality of the Spanish Empire. They passed on this paradise because it was missing the two major things they needed to actually justify building a colony: gold and a native population they could use for labor. Since there was zero massive financial incentive, Juan de Bermuda basically just said, all right, drop off a dozen pigs to breed in case anybody gets stranded here later, and then he just sailed away.
But you know that whole demonic reputation? It wasn't actually ghosts. It came from very real, purely natural phenomena that just happened to absolutely terrify sailors in the dark. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're on this creaking wooden ship, it's pitch black, and suddenly you hear the wild, eerie shrieks of these endemic cowhow birds just echoing across the water. Then, mix in the unsettling squealing from those feral pigs the Spanish dropped off and the violent roar of waves slamming into hidden rings of jagged coral reefs. If you were a superstitious sailor in the 1500s, you'd think you were sailing right into the gates of hell too.
And we know for a fact that the world was totally aware of this place incredibly early on. Look at Peter Martyr's map from 1511. La Bermudas is right there on the paper, but, and this is so telling, it's actually drawn upside down in the top corner. They knew it was there, they officially documented it, but they wanted absolutely nothing to do with it.
Because nobody actually wanted to settle there, Bermuda morphed into an infamous graveyard instead of a bustling new colony. For the rest of the 1500s, the island went from being just a useless spot on the map to a truly terrifying maritime death trap. If you got stranded there, it was purely by accident, and you were instantly thrust into this desperate, brutal fight for your life.
The sheer desperation of the people who washed up there is unbelievable. In 1556, a French privateer ship crashed hard on the reefs, and 45 of the men were just straight up abandoned by their own commander. To survive, they had to cobble together makeshift rafts and cross a river that was 300 paces wide. At one point, they literally had to cut their own hats apart and tie the pieces to their feet just to walk across fields covered in sharp, prickly pears. They finally managed to build a cedar boat to escape, but they still had to make the agonizing choice to leave 8 of their guys behind.
26. That is it. That's the total number of men, out of a crew of 55, who survived another infamous shipwreck in 1593. The crew, led by Captain de la Barbetière, actually thought they had safely passed the Isle of Devils, so they started celebrating, drinking a bunch of wine, and basically kept zero watch on the deck. They miscalculated their position so badly that right at midnight, they slammed at full speed into the northwest reefs.
It's absolutely fascinating to compare the crazy rumors floating around Europe with what was actually happening on the ground. You had Spanish sailors begging their royalty for money to go exploit these completely imaginary pearl fisheries, but the reality? It was just raw survival. The survivors from that 1593 wreck spent 5 grueling months rebuilding a boat out of native cedar, basically using lime and actual turtle oil to caulk the wood. Oh, and those feral pigs the Spanish left behind? The castaways tried eating them, but ironically, they turned out to be incredibly lean and just a terrible, terrible source of food.
Now, while castaways are literally fighting for survival on the beaches, zoom out for a second. The global geopolitical stage was shifting fast. English naval power was starting to rise up and seriously challenge Spanish dominance. You've got King James being born, Queen Elizabeth taking the throne, and by 1585, the British Admiral Richard Grenville proves that the waters right around Bermuda are about to become a massive flashpoint for international conflict.
Grenville ended up taking down a massive Spanish ship right off the coast of Bermuda, proving that privateering in that area could be incredibly lucrative. After a brutal 3-day battle, the Spanish galleon finally surrendered. But look at the staggering discrepancy in how they value the stolen loot. The English basically went on the record saying, "Oh yeah, we took about 15,000 pounds worth of stuff." Meanwhile, the Spanish estimated they lost 50,000 pounds of gold, silver, and pearls. Somebody's math is definitely off, right? Regardless, unquestioned Spanish dominance in the Western Atlantic was officially over.
You know what's really wild, though? The people running these empires were just as superstitious as the sailors. Take King James, for example. Before he even became King of England, he survived this incredibly violent storm at sea that blew his ship totally off course, and he didn't blame the weather. He blamed it entirely on witches. His intense obsession with the supernatural perfectly mirrored those exact same fears people had about Bermuda's deadly reefs. It's crazy to see how much Europe's fear of the literal unknown directly shaped how they mapped and interacted with the world.
So, wrapping up the 1500s, Bermuda is no longer just some whispered rumor in a tavern. As we can see on Petrus Plancius's map from 1594, it is heavily charted and firmly defined on the global stage. The Spanish and French knew exactly where its horrors were, the English were already out there defeating galleons in its waters, and major English power players like Sir Thomas Gates were actively starting to build their influence. For 100 years, the Isle of Devils was basically this haunted stopover, terrifying completely accidental castaways and massive armadas alike. But now, you got these global superpowers rapidly converging right on its waters. A tipping point was absolutely inevitable. Which leaves us with this huge question. What actually happens when a shipwreck on a supposedly demonic island is no longer just a tragic accident, but the violent, messy birth of a brand new civilization? Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. See you next time.